escape. She sidestepped as her mind raced. The construction workers might help her. They were a block and a half away. Nick might save her again, but she doubted she could plow through James to get back to the bar. Dark alleys, dimly lit streets, and roadways blocked by orange cones gave her little hope. As her heel slipped off the curb, Krista set her shoulder and bent her knees. She charged toward and rammed one of the smaller gang members. He stumbled back. Good, that caught him by surprise. A hand swiped at her jacket. Luckily, it didn't grab anything. Krista took what little luck she had and ran with it. The boys were faster. A thunderous clap of footsteps pounded behind her. Heavy, ravenous breaths grunted louder as their steps grew closer. The Park Avenue intersection became more distinct as she ran. Streaks of dim, hazy light barely lit the darkened street. The road construction equipment, the steamroller and a backhoe, stood like bright yellow beacons. Just a little closer, and the workers might see her. Another hand swiped at her. Panic tightened in her chest. Running wouldn't give her an escape this time. The gang was practically on top of her when she started. One boy had already closed in. He kept pace barely a step behind her. Krista pushed herself to run faster when a set of fingers probed her jacket and clenched the nylon fabric in a tight grip. The fingers made a fist by her collar. She felt a sudden jerk. She planted her foot and lunged forward to loosen the grip. The fist held her clothing, causing her to lose her balance. Krista let out a sharp cry as her knees connected with the concrete. Her body's momentum continued to carry her over the rough pavement. Her attacker stumbled with her. They lost their footing and both rolled onto the street. Bits of gravel tore the flesh from her palms when she tried to stop herself and push him off of her. Krista twisted under her assailant's weight, kicked with all her might, and swung her battered and bloodied fists. Pain exploded through her wrist as the side of her hand connected with his hard shoulder. Another swing landed her knuckles against his neck. She heard him grunt and mutter a curse, but it was hardly enough to help regain her footing. "That's enough," a masculine voice ordered from the darkened street. Time stilled as gang members glanced toward the shadows. Krista followed the glances. The voice. She recognized that voice. The Cheshire Cat had come to her aid. James, the man closest to her, and also the one who held her down, narrowed his eyes. "Who's there?" he asked the empty street. He shifted his attention to the 5 other members. He waited a full 5 seconds for the shadows to answer. When no answer came, he turned his attention back to Krista. "I said, that's enough," the hidden voice repeated. James ignored the warning as he adjusted his grip on Krista, then stopped as slow, rhythmic footsteps echoed off the buildings. A lone figure walked toward the gang. James sighed at the distraction while he considered the newcomer. He pushed himself off Krista. His shoes skidded on the pavement when he twisted away from her. Relief replaced fear as Krista's eyes locked on her rescuer. It was him, again. Had he followed her? If he did, she couldn't be more thankful. He was the last person she expected to skulk to her rescue and bark orders at a group of gang members. Creepy or not, she would take anyone over James and his friends. She scanned the darkness behind him. Krista waited for a group of police officers, mobsters, anyone who might help win the fight. To her surprise, it was just him. By the amused look on James's face, the same thought had occurred to him as well. He must be crazy. Krista's relief faded to annoyance. 6-2 still left the odds out of their favor, and it was a long shot to count herself as any help. "We're a little busy here," James said in a signature, tough guy voice. "Turn around and go back where you came from. You got no business here." Nick's friend simply offered the young gang leader a small nod toward Krista. "I think it's time you left her alone." James reached into his pocket. "I don't have time for this." He nodded to the man closest to his left. "Mike, get her and hold her down. Come on, Russ, let's deal with." The sentence ended unfinished as a single shot disrupted the movement. Not a loud shot, more like a finger snapped at a misbehaving child. Krista's breath caught in her throat as Mike fell to his knees. He locked his eyes on Krista, his face contorted in pain as he clutched his hand to the fresh wound in his side. "Maybe I didn't make myself clear." Nick's friend stated each word with menace. Krista scooted along the pavement. She used her shoes as leverage to inch away from the wounded man. Part of her felt sorry for him. He was young, somewhere in his late teens, and had followed the wrong crowd. She shifted her attention to the 5 remaining gang members. 2 of them already retreated with careful steps away from her. The frightened look on each of their faces left them curious. They wondered if they might be next. It took a second for James to compose his shock, but it was Russ, his second in command by the looks of it, who made the mistake of reacting too quickly. Krista noticed the subtle movement. Russ's arm twisted and his hand jerked back. She glimpsed the silver glint of polished metal. She opened her mouth to warn her rescuer about the weapon. The thought of his life ending on her account brought her father's murder fresh to her mind. This couldn't happen to her twice within a year. The gun didn't make it high enough to become a threat. Nick's mysterious friend had already maneuvered his hand toward the man beside James. "Do you really want to try your luck, Russell? Because you're not going to win this fight." He shifted his eyes. "What about you, Zach, or James?" James stopped any further altercation with a slight hand gesture. His eyes never left the lone stranger. "She's all yours, man." He gestured for his group to back off. His gaze shifted briefly to Krista. "Just let me catch you out here by yourself again." Krista held his stare. Threats didn't scare her. She'd been threatened more times than she could count, mostly by her estranged husband. The 2 gang members behind her molded into the darkness. They quietly disappeared as James took Russ and the 1 remaining nameless member down the street. "So," Nick's friend said, offering his hand, "do you want to listen to me now?" Krista brushed her palms on her pants and cringed from the open wounds. She turned her palms over and frowned. Visible wounds were hard to explain to her mother. She didn't have long to assess the damage before a strong hand wrapped around her wrist and pulled her to her feet. Krista looked at him. She wondered how she could have ever thought of him as creepy. Relief nearly overwhelmed her. This man had walked out of the darkness and saved her life. Krista had to fight the urge to throw her arms around him. A gurgling sound brought her back to the present. The young man was dying, forgotten like a piece of debris in the street. Nick's friend glanced at him, but Krista couldn't bring herself to look. "Why did you do that?" she asked instead. He arched his brow. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had the situation under control." "I didn't," Krista confessed. "I just never expected you to. I mean, you don't seem like—" She gave up trying to put her thoughts into words. "I don't know." "A thank you would suffice," he said as he brushed bits of dirt off her sleeves. Krista stepped away from his reach and offered him a sheepish smile. "Thank you." He dropped his hands to his sides. "You're welcome." His eyes studied her as if he could hear her thoughts and was trying to make sense of them. She ran her hands down her sleeves to brush off stray pieces of dirt and gravel. She flinched when a piece of debris scraped along her fresh wounds. Krista looked at her hands to cover the awkward silence. She felt like a fool, indebted to a man she had been rude to just moments before. Krista averted her eyes to the building on the left. She hoped something in its gray, dead exterior would give her reason to stare. Eventually, her gaze wandered to the man on the ground. To add to her growing agitation, his body had stilled. "He's dead." Krista snapped back to Nick's friend. It wasn't the confirmation of the man being dead that grabbed her attention. It was the light and casual way in which he'd let her know. He shot a young man and acted natural, like he'd just finished taking out the trash. "You know," he continued, "you shouldn't mess with people like that." Krista assumed this was an attempt to lighten the mood, or he seriously misunderstood the situation. She didn't think it was funny. "I wasn't messing with them," she said slowly. "They were messing with me." He had the nerve to laugh at her. "You can relax. It's over now." How could he be so calm? Krista noticed his hands were empty. Where did he put the gun? "You just took on 6 guys by yourself. You're either incredibly brave or stupid." "I'm not stupid and don't consider myself brave." "What is it then? What makes you take on 6 guys to save someone like me?" "It's simple, really." He took a step and gestured for her to follow. They're an example of the inner city's misguided youth. The leader is James Tillis. Russell is his brother. A couple of troubled kids who were thrown around the system until they became too old for the city to care. Now they run this section of town, an everyday street gang. They prey on women which means they don't fight anyone who might stand the chance of winning. His eyes constantly scanned the streets, darted into alleys, and glanced upward at lit windows. Every sound, every flicker of light caught his attention. I stepped in because I held the advantage and I still want to talk to you. His eyes came back to her. Couldn't do that with them hanging around. They cut down a back alley. Krista glanced back at the fallen member. Are you just going to leave him there? Someone will have heard the commotion. The police are probably already on the way. They'll clean it up. Krista looked ahead. Did you follow me so you could talk to me? Yes and no, he replied. Yes, I want to talk to you, and no, that's not the reason. James and his buddies knew you were at Nick's. They waited for you to come out. What? You knew they were going to attack me before I left the bar? Yes. Why didn't you tell me that before I left? Would you have changed your decision to leave? That was a stupid question. Of course. That's why I didn't tell you. Krista took a second to wrap her mind around that twisted piece of information. You wanted me to be attacked? He let out a long sigh. It gave her the impression that anyone who questioned his personal choices survived on just this side of stupid. No, if I wanted you to be attacked, I wouldn't have stepped in. I wanted to see how you would handle the situation. If you're curious, I wasn't impressed with your method. It wasn't a method. It was survival. Either way, you failed. What? I was outnumbered, she argued. So was I, he countered. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Damn him. It was hard to argue with a strong point. Krista tried to focus on another angle in her defense when he broke her thoughts. I didn't come out here to debate your lack of survival skills. I'm more interested in discussing my offer, he said. I also want to tell you that I'm not interested in accepting your hunt, but I can give you information you might find useful, or at the very least, enlightening. His attitude irritated her. How did he stay so calm about everything? His dark tone hovered a hair over creepy and an inch below dangerous. He remained unfazed in a situation that nearly scared the skin off her. On the other hand, he did offer protection as long as she was with him. For all his mystery, he did make her feel safe. I wasn't very nice to you, she admitted. I'm surprised you're still willing to help me. Well, it doesn't mean much to me, but Nick won't leave me alone about it. He seems to be a bit partial to you. He paused. I guess you were nicer to him. Krista wondered if he'd talked to Nick lately. She wouldn't mention their last conversation. Probably best not to push her luck. I don't have a lot of money. That's more my problem than yours, isn't it? I suppose it is. He stopped walking and gently touched her arm. Krista turned to face him. We'll talk about payment later. I do have 2 rules. First, my name never gets mentioned to anyone. Second, I make all the decisions. He extended his hand. Do you agree to this business arrangement? Krista lowered her eyes. He held his hand steady in front of her and patiently waited for her to take it, to seal a deal that didn't fully explain what was at stake. Krista made her decision. His hand warmed hers as she clasped her fingers around the side of his. The contact was almost too much. Electric. Life-changing. She pulled her hand away and clenched her fist to hide a slight tremble. So, Krista asked, her voice shaky, what's the information? Not now. We're going to set up a meeting. He looked over her head and stared into the night. Tomorrow morning, 8:30? Krista nodded. She didn't have a lot of activities taking up her schedule. Fine. Where? On the corner of 5th and 64th. There's a closed coffee shop undergoing reconstruction. It's a good place to exchange information. Krista nodded again. Okay, is there anything else? I don't think so. If there is, we can discuss it tomorrow. All right, I'll see you then. Krista turned to leave and stopped. Do I get your name now? The corner of his cheek rose. Jonah. An invisible weight lifted off her. Knowing his name somehow made him appear more human. He was less mysterious, but still dangerous. Thank you, Jonah.